Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. My name is Winslet. I'm a director with ARK Consultancy, and I'll be chairing the next hour. Title of the session: what will be the impact of COVID on the future design and development of homes be? So, kind of by way of introduction, I, like many of you, have been embedded over the last 7 months or so with residents, health, charities, housing providers, to come to terms with what is the changing nature of just what our housing might be delivering us for us all in the future. You may have found, like many of us, your values challenged together with your views of what space and place mean, both professionally and personally, of course. And the experience will have been different for all of us. Our home and its location are now both a work and combined leisure spaces we're all too familiar with, like never before. So organisations that we at ARK are working with are already questioning their motivations for design, what growth means in the context of things like typology in terms of place, and what that means for our work and our health, of course. So in the context of this session, what it also means for our organisations is, what's the cost of this going to be? What's the management delivery profile going to be? So very much a live issue. And unfortunately, we have a stellar lineup to give us a steer on what they see this all meaning for us. A panel this afternoon. First, we have Mike Diath. Mike is a partner at HTA Design, and for us today, fortunately, has been looking into this very subject for a paper to be published shortly. He'll give us some early insights into his thoughts as a taster, not a spoiler, as a taster for what's to be published soon. Second, we have Louise Wyman. Louise is Director of Strategic Growth and Development at Manchester City Council, not only responsible for delivery for what is, of course, one of our major local authorities and major cities. Louise has previously led the design and inclusive growth agenda at West Midlands Combined Authority. Third of our speakers today is Grant Oakley, Executive Director for Growth and Development at Platform Housing. Again, one of our larger housing providers, 47,000 homes, as we know, in total. Grant has spent 30 years in property, retail development, urban regeneration, both here and abroad in both the public and commercial sectors. So what I'd say in summary, a beautifully balanced panel. We'll have 15 minutes, there or thereabouts, for each of their presentations. And then, of course, time for questions. So please make use of the question facility. I'll be picking those up, and we'll be able to relay those to the panel in due course. Mike, can I ask you to kick off, please?
Thank you, Ian. And hello, everybody. Here I am sitting at home, so enjoying my home environment and my working environment. And the title of my presentation is Post-Pandemic Housing, a Catalyst for Collaboration. And I don't want to make light of this terrible period that we're going through, and my commiserations to anybody that's fallen unwell, but there have been some positives, not least of which us learning to work from home. In particular, I'd note the necessity of greater collaboration. My practice, HTA Design, we have a strapline which is creative collaboration, and we know that the benefits of coming together in great design can have on housing and placemaking. My presentation is about building on this with a focus on greater collaboration to drive modular manufacture. Some of you may know that my organisation has been very much in the vanguard of modular delivery of homes for about the last 15 years. And we see this as a way of lifting housing in the post-pandemic period. If I could have the next slide, please. So another positive was certainly in the early days of lockdown, there was a bit of time, valuable time, and I spent that thinking and collaborating with my friend Mark Farmer, the government's MMC champion. And we thought, well, what do we say to government in terms of us as practitioners? What would we say to the government in terms of what you do after a period like this, with the inevitable downturn that's going to follow? And without giving too much away, we've put this report together, which is entitled Build Homes, Build Jobs, Build Innovation. blueprint for a housing-led industrial strategy. And we're trying to make this land well with the government. And I know that there were some announcements this week from Robert Jenrick, and we're hoping that these will talk very much to some of the themes in this paper that I will also touch on now. So next slide, please. So here we are. This is, you probably recognize this chart. It's taken from the wonderful MHCLG live tables, but it imposes on it the recession, the Great Recession of 2008 and 9. Now, many of you watching may not have been in housing at that time. I've been around long enough to have a few of these, and you sort of get to recognize the pattern of what happens after or as we go through these downturns. The terrible thing about the last recession was it wiped away the small to medium enterprises who were responsible for a significant part of our housing delivery, and also local authority house building was pretty much non-existent, in fact almost zero, just before going into the last recession. And we've also had the experience over the last 12 years of trying to get back to where we were before that last recession. And indeed, it's pretty salutary to see that it was 41 years ago that we reached a 210,000 level of new homes in a year. 210,000 homes, but that was 41 years ago. And the government is talking about 300 homes. And we're very much focused not on permitted development rights, but on new build housing delivery. And if we're going to hit that 300,000, how can we use the catalyst of the pandemic to get closer to that? Next slide, please. I think this is interesting because, frankly, it illustrates some of the issues we face, and we are great advocates for house builders. I mean, they do an incredible job. They're incredibly efficient. Their business model clawed back to a pretty strong position last year where they have cash and they've survived. But actually, we did lose that 30% as SME house builders. And I think that the big issue for us is that we're actually too reliant. And as this slide demonstrates, just 5 house builders were responsible for 37% of housing delivery last year. That's a staggering figure. Next slide, please. So counter-cyclical models, really, really important. And this is what we're founding our paper on: build homes, build jobs, build innovation, as well as supporting house builders. And that is important. This is additionality we're talking about here. We need to find ways to scale up and deliver the quality we want at the scale we need. Our paper talks to the opportunity, therefore, that we have in build to rent. And we know, because we've visited schemes after the last downturn in America, where multifamily housing worked very well through their downturn. And actually, I'm pleased to say that comparatively, our build to rent clients are doing okay through the downtime. Probably they're not singing from the rooftops, but they are doing better in terms of absorption of their product than you might expect. And of course, we have to acknowledge the government has put in massive stimulus to the absorption of house builder products. That will be time limited. So I'm talking about the period beyond this initial stimulus into next year. Next slide, please. And of course, we need to look at other new operators. This is Pocket's scheme, a discounted market rent specialist we're very pleased to work with. This is our scheme for them in Tottenham. And again, their market has proven to be very much those key workers that we've applauded through the downturn, and they keep good records on that. So discounted sales definitely got a place as a counter-cyclical model. Next slide, please. And we also need local authority house building. And it's really good to see that 35 years ago, when I started my career, there was still some local authority house building, and it's coming back. And I would definitely acknowledge the Morfit, or advise people to look at the Morfit Clifford report, their research in 2017 and 19, which points to this uptick. And I'm pleased to say that they are repeating this research for next year, and need sponsorship. Anybody out there interested in that, see me. Next slide, please. Now, these models all have a clear link with modular delivery. Build to rent, this is our scheme at Greenford Quay. which is built by Tide and Vision Modular, completed in 20 months, 379 homes, already 30% occupied despite the downturn. Next slide, please. Discounted sale. This is a pocket scheme again at Mapleton Terrace by Architects Metropolitan Workshop, again Vision Modular and Tide Construction, and it's obviously using Pocket's own version of standardization, and that's not cookie cutter standardization, that's standardization to enable time to be spent on making buildings beautiful, just as they should be. Next slide, please. And local authorities, this is our scheme for Barking and Dagenham, Be First, at Padnell Lakes, which is 300 homes, all affordable rental, and again, the yield-based income model, again, working very well with the quality and speed of modular delivery. So next slide, please. So this slide from the Morfit Clifford research shows across the UK how local authorities are beginning to get into direct delivery of homes. And we see this as being the big opportunity. And this is certainly what we talked to in the report that Mark and I are writing. Next slide, please. We see this as a potential to scale up as part of the industrial strategy for jobs, but also a low carbon future, the opportunity to build homes in factories where you can control the working experience with safe working, properly distance and so on. I think this is a great opportunity to really get a lift in our ability to deliver our homes through modular manufacture. Next slide, please. So our paper looks, which worked with 50 consultees, and I'm pleased to say that Manchester was one of those. We identified that the most important step is to create a smooth and sustained long-term pipeline of demand. And that demand should be visible to modular delivery. If we can do that, the sector will step up, it will invest in itself, it will scale up. This has been through the consultation we've undertaken with manufacturers as part of the report. And the clearest route for this is for local authorities and housing associations to come together and aggregate their demand using multi-site long-term pipelines in a programmatic response that is clearly visible to manufacturers so that they can see, yep, we can go for this. This is the one of bringing down costs, of actually increasing quality, and actually maybe facilitated by the government's white paper, but the devil is in the detail on that, so we might leave that to another conversation. But we must, to deliver this, must move away from a transactional and fragmented delivery approach towards more a long-term relationship based on an understanding and investment by clients in products and their continuous improvement. Next slide, please. So we've got a plethora of white papers coming forward, and in there, there's going to be risks and challenges, but some great opportunities too. And we are making some big asks in our paper of government, and when it's published very shortly, hopefully the government will have a listening ear, so we'll see on this. But we're definitely looking for them to support aggregation, to support collaboration and put stimulus into those areas. Next slide, please. So we've got asks of local authorities and housing associations embracing collaboration, looking to take your learned best practice and offering it to others so that they're not reinventing the wheel, and developing your programmatic responses to development, not individual site-by-site activities, and coming together with your like-minded fellow associations and local authorities to deliver more. And actually reinventing clienting. I think that we need to think through how you client with manufacture rather than construction, and procure for it as well. And I think there's going to be some big discussions on that, and we'll see those in part in the paper when it comes forward. And finally, the last slide. So creating a sustained and smooth long-term pipeline of demand that is visible and appropriate for modular delivery. That's the one big takeaway I'd ask you to write down, take with you, put it up on your post-it note at work. We need this programmatic response. And I think if we can do that, 300,000 beautiful, high-quality homes a year, well, it's going to be easy. So let's look to that bright future from the difficult times we're in now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Great stuff. And again, just for those viewing, remember to any questions to Mike, get them through the system so that we can get them up and start speaking afterwards. Next up, Louise, if you are happy to go ahead.
Yes, happy to get underway. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Delighted to be here. We're very supportive in Manchester of the proposals in Mike's paper. It is absolutely the way forward. We see ourselves as a platform to bring partners together, the planning function we obviously have, the ambitions we have as a city. So it has been a really tough 6 months for all of us, and likewise, sympathies go out to any of you on the webinar who've been affected. I know all of our lives have been touched by the difficult nature of this time. But I'm pleased to say I am back in the town hall in Manchester now. The city is beginning to buzz again. So I've put our famous bee symbol up there. It was really heartening to come into Piccadilly yesterday morning and see it thronging with commuters again. And we haven't seen that over the summer. So this city is getting back to business. We're doing it in a safe way. We have to be incredibly careful how we return and how we socially distance and how we respect each other's space. But Manchester is a doing place. It's why I'm delighted to be here. And we'll talk now about our housing ambitions and the links to Mike's report. So next slide, please. So delighted to say we're one of the fastest growing cities in Europe. It's a real energy that you feel when you come into Manchester, but there's also a massive kind of social agenda to take the welfare of our citizens very seriously. And so there's a huge amount of work happening across GM as a whole, I would say, and certainly across our partnerships within the City Council, with the health sector, with the housing sector, because we see those integral to the way the city develops. So our response is first and foremost to protect citizens and then to very carefully plan a bold way forward to deliver housing, because the housing crisis that we were talking about last year has been rightly kind of overtaken by the narrative around the health crisis, but actually the health crisis is only exacerbating the housing crisis in the long term. So as we start to live with COVID, as we build ways of carrying out our business and carrying out our housing delivery with COVID in the background until we can seriously remove it from the health risks, then we're doing that in a careful way, a way that protects citizens, but in the long term will be a bold platform for the future of the city. Next slide, please. So just to put some metrics around bold statements, this is quite an interesting graph, I think, because those of you who know Manchester, this is showing the population on the left, and then the time on the bottom axis. And you can see there that we were actually losing people from the city centre in the 80s. So it was a declining population right through until that kind of tragic moment for the city and that kind of moment of change that was the bomb that went off in the Arndale in 96. And then the city took such a strong position to regenerate, to rebuild, to bring people back into the city centre. So we had a very small city centre population in the 80s and early 90s, but you can see the rapid growth there, particularly in housing, and soon will exceed 600,000 people within the city centre. So it's a rapid period of growth. So the message here is around Manchester having a strong track record of housing delivery, and we've done that in partnership, and we've done that in a way that creates an affordable offer at the same time as a for sale offer. Let's come on to look at some of the tenures on the next slide, please. I found this really interesting as well. So again, looking what's happened previously, we had a lot of owner occupation that is now dropping. So the dark blue line is the owner occupation. You can see that going down. And actually that point that Mike made around the rented sector, PRS, really increasing. So getting up towards 40% on PRS. So that shows actually we're more like other European cities where you have a high proportion of renters within your city centre. So very much that kind of European picture, big growth in it, and you can see the change in the social housing line, which is the kind of lighter grey colour there. Let's go on to the next slide. So hopefully that gives you a bit of context to the city. Again, one of our bold early moves is to have a housing strategy, a 10-year housing strategy. So we're at the midpoint of that now. Our ask is for 20% affordable homes, which will produce 6,400 in the plan period. And actually, we're predicting that we'll exceed that, because as our city grows, as our economy returns to good health, we do have an increased need for the affordable sector in particular. So to deliver that, we're doing some serious joint ventures. We've got some major projects in the city, in the Northern Gateway with FEC, and what we call the Eastern Gateway with Manlife, Splash Places, Great Places, and other partners. We see that as a big growth area, both in the east and in the north. And we're bringing forward lots of commercial opportunities across the city centre. There's a lot in the press about Mayfield at the moment, how that regenerates the area south of Piccadilly. And again, to echo Mike's points, we don't do it alone. We do it in partnerships, 17 RPs that we work actively with in the city, and between them they manage 65,000 homes. So a big emphasis on partnerships, on creating the platform for the housing to be delivered in Manchester. Next slide, please. I'm not going to drive into all the detail here, but you can start to see the breakdown on this slide, and we'll share the slides afterwards of our mix of social rent, affordable, shared ownership, the different tenure types. So it's very much about that range of rental offers, so that we can have our key workers, our frontline workers that have been so central to us surviving the last 6 months in the heart of our cities, close to their places of work. Next slide. COVID's also taught us, I guess, some really tough lessons. We've had to do a bit of soul searching during this time, because it's exposed the real differentials in a city like Manchester, and you'll have seen this in some of the coverage on BBC Two in the Manctopia show that has been running for the last few weeks. We have extremes of some of the most expensive real estate in the country, and then some poor housing conditions, and some communities that have been adversely affected, disproportionately affected, I would say, by the pandemic. So the COVID-19 lessons are around our need to respond to those inequalities. The homelessness issue is a big issue. I'm really proud of the work we're doing here, and Andy Burnham has shown serious leadership in terms of his scheme to get a bed for everybody who is homeless. But we need to continue that through the period as we move to the end of the year now, and we're fearful of a spike in more cases as we head into winter. So there's a huge amount of work we need to do in the homeless space, and we want to work with partners to do that, and to make homes really affordable if you're on low incomes. We've also seen some of the serious food, digital fuel poverty that exists across the city. So although I'm telling a proud story, I'm also wanting to illustrate that we have a lot of issues we need to address, and we take those really seriously. And if anything, the pandemic has highlighted those really sharply. Next slide, please. It's also had an impact on all of us in the development community. We spend a lot of time talking to partners. I'm pleased to say now we follow the economic kind of profiles of businesses within Manchester on a weekly basis. So we're constantly tracking the data. We're researching what's happening to pipelines of activity. Our estimates for this week is that we're back to 95% of pre-COVID construction activity. So actually, that's a pretty good story. Again, it's a bit disparate. Some businesses have survived better than others, and many businesses, as Ian said at the beginning, have had to rethink priorities and rethink how they deliver, and we know that supply lines have been affected. I heard an anecdotal piece of information this week that we had one firm of contractors who were driving to Poland to buy what they needed for their cement production. So you know, you've got extremes of challenges within the supply line, certainly, and in the sort of feeder industries into housing delivery. So a lot of repositioning, a lot of adjustments that we're all going through as individuals, but the business community certainly going through. But it is a good news story that construction levels are returning to almost what they were before COVID in Manchester. And we see housing and construction as part of our recovery plan. I was at our exec committee yesterday presenting our economic recovery plan, and housing, the delivery of regeneration, that kind of bold, resilient approach that Manchester has taken to other periods of difficulty is front and centre in our forward plans. Next slide, please. So we will build back better. I'm not dwelling on design here, because I think you've seen some great examples of design from from Mike, but we have absolutely every intention of building back better in terms of quality, addressing some of those poor housing issues I touched on. We've got conversations next week with Homes England. We want a city partnership with Homes England. We see the benefit of us collaborating with a government agency that has a real focus on housing and infrastructure investment to deliver bigger volumes of affordable housing. So we will go out of our way to align with people who share our ambitions. Some research from Savills showing that the RP communities share that ambition, and they themselves want to grow by 26%. So those are exactly the partners we need to work with. Modular matters as well. I mean, Mike has articulated the real benefits of modular, and we see that if we align with both partners, government agencies, and the modular providers, that's the way you deliver at scale. So that programmatic response is exactly where we are too in Manchester. And we see lots of job generation skills, building activity allied to that, because the other really tough bit of this summer is that an awful lot of our working age population are on furlough. Some have lost their jobs. There's a massive kind of shift happening within the employment profile of our youngsters and our 50-plus-year-olds in this city. So we've got to be generating those jobs, those opportunities, and that kind of building back in a very bold way. Next slide, please. So what will we focus on? Genuine affordability. When we have got extremes of wealth and poverty, we've got to make sure that we're addressing affordability. The pace, the platform, the program approach that Mike outlined, that is what we will do here. We do need to do more to address temporary accommodation for our homeless communities, particularly as we head into winter. And we're looking at some great innovation in the MMC space with partners to do just that. We have a zero carbon ambition of 2038 in Manchester. So again, it matters that we think about the green agenda as we push the growth agenda. I've touched on skills and training, and we're now recasting our Manchester strategy, which is the strategy for both the City Council, businesses within the city, and that is all around people, place and prosperity. So they will be the cornerstones of our economic recovery plan, driving the prosperity of the city for the people in the place that we call home, as in Manchester. Last slide, please. Now, this is a dad joke, I'm told. My brilliant housing director, Kevin Lowry, added this slide, and it is to reiterate that at the same time as driving inclusive growth, the housing ambitions that we have, we will do it in a safe way. We'll remain alert, and we'll try to keep our social distances, unlike our COVID compliant officer here. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Louise. I'm a big fan of Maintopia. Just saying, it's worth it. It's a great watch, well worth doing. Perhaps Garant, if you are okay, you can step in now.
Sure. Thanks very much. I'm a big fan of dad jokes, so I'm quite pleased with that. Just a timely reference that Savills released a bit of information yesterday about a survey they've completed about people's feeling about future housing. 56% want to work from home more regularly, from 49% in April. 57% said a separate space to work from home had become more important, and that was up from 44% in April. And 62% said that a garden or outdoor space had become more important. So our future homes need to provide that sort of indoor home office space that have great access to good quality natural light throughout the day and better soundproofing between rooms and external noise. And in my case, the 2 puppies that my daughters tricked me into buying during lockdown. The Code for Sustainable Homes back in 2010 said provision of sufficient space and services which allow occupants to set up a home office in a suitable room. And that space was for dedicated work and must have adequate ventilation and achieve average daylight factor of 1.5%. That was back in 2010. So if you think about, we've transitioned away from that. And obviously the other impact on that is that if we provide an additional space, does that get classed as a bedroom, and how therefore does it affect under occupancy, and how we're actually going to plan out our homes, whether it be apartments or residential estates. We're aware of the profound impact of our surroundings and how it affects our health and well-being. And of course, as much as we look at the home, and the previous speakers have mentioned the infrastructure that surrounds it. So in our placemaking, we need to create really high quality external spaces, secure private outdoor space and communal areas, in contrast to what is often just leftover space. And we've also got to look at how we maintain these areas and how that affects the residents going forward. So designing to provide social value. While people have become accustomed to speaking to family over Skype, doing yoga on Zoom, or spending time in virtual clubs, we're also missing physically being together. So the interaction of formal and informal facilities, including green infrastructure to promote good mental health and physical health. But we cannot underestimate the importance of bedding these spaces and good long-term stewardship models, excuse me, to create communities that flourish and become resilient in years to come. So we need to develop and rethink development models that incorporate commercial spaces within buildings, 10 to 15-minute walk or cycle ride from most homes, and considerably less time spent in a car or using public transport. So new communities with strong space-making principles, providing access to social infrastructure, such as shops, doctors, and these obviously go on to contribute to economic growth. So another part of the design process that we'll be looking at is how transitional spaces from outdoor to indoor and communal areas, and how we transition safely between mass areas of public community. And I guess another part of it is whether you question apartments and how a lot of people need good defensible balconies, whether they're good, sorry, I think I've lost my signal.
No, we can hear you, Geraint. We can hear you well. You're on mute at the moment, though.
Right.
There we go.
So on top of the challenge of COVID, we've also got the introduction of planning reform. And I think that if we look at how that may impact the provision of affordable housing going forward, and how that may well integrate with how communities are going to be constructed in urban spaces and suburban spaces, I think that a lot more thought needs to be put into how we can actually work together with local authorities and other housing associations to work collaboratively to bring land forward and create what's best value for the community. Quite often, if we are looking at different design standards for the provision of affordable housing against that of high density private sector development, it's a two-tier system that makes it very difficult for us to compete on the open market. So another part of our future ambition is to grow our capability of delivering modern methods of construction, about future-proofing the demand on site for trades and labour that have to work in quite challenging conditions, how we can make sure that that mass reduction is fulfilled, and how the skills and capability are addressed. And part of that obviously is about how those homes can provide flexible indoor space that can provide such things as work from home, schooling from home, and how we can actually make sure that our supply chain can interact with those new modern methods of construction deliverers. So HAs can collaborate to provide an order book. We've got financial capacity, we've got the capability. And I think that if we can set up that sort of relationship that provides them with a substantial order book, we can really help those businesses take off. From a technology point of view, broadband obviously is a major driver for people when they're looking for a new home. And that's for the provision of smart technology as well to support vulnerable people who may be living at home and the ability to monitor their well-being remotely. And I think also the introduction of touchless technology, particularly in communal areas, things like open doors, access to storage spaces, service cupboards, things like that will have to be considered how we'll do that in some quite complex communal zones. The other point that I'd make is that the more people work at home, the increased cost of higher utility bills, how we can make homes much more efficient and much more sustainable going forward. It means that many of us will have to prioritize energy efficiency and sustainability. And if we're actually going to be contributing to that supply chain of modern methods construction, particularly in terms of heat, light, and sustainable maintenance as well. Because obviously we have to, as managers of this housing stock in perpetuity, we must be able to maintain that and to be able to future-proof any changes to those properties. And I think flexibility is absolutely key, not just to the internal space, but the external space. I don't think any person or family use their homes in exactly the same way, even if the property is identical. The way in which we interact with our own space and our outdoor facilities is different. So again, if you understand the communities, you understand the way people want to live, And that's across the, quite a considerable region where we deliver both rural, urban and suburban new homes and city centre. We've got to have a very adaptable way of looking at how we can provide those spaces. Louise talked about building better. I think part of the challenges for housing associations going forward, and particularly us, is that we've got a lot of existing estates that are no longer providing the sort of external space or living accommodation that people really want now, and almost certainly will need to have improved in a very short time. So it's how we can actually work with the local authorities, work with the communities in consultation to improve those estates that have some of the most challenged areas in terms of providing a secure external environment, access to employment, access to those social facilities that I talked about earlier, schools, surgeries, chemists, and so on. And I think one of the other points that I would raise is that I think that we've gone through an incredible 6 months, but we can't fall into complacency. We've narrowly missed a situation like this in the past. We've had bird flu, MERS, SARS. I think we've really got to start planning for the long term, and we can't have a knee-jerk reaction that maybe overcomes some of the challenges that we've had now. We need to look at what could happen in the future. And the other point I would make is that obviously the delivery of housing takes time. If you think about the planning process, getting to site from land acquisition to actually building a home being 2 to 3 years, we're building houses now that probably aren't fit for purpose for what we want to provide in terms of flexible space and flexible outdoor space. So it's how quickly can we integrate the changes that we're talking about to make a difference for future housing stock. And that is going to be a real challenge for anybody who's actually in the process of development now. And if we're building homes now that fit for people, how quickly can we make that change? How can we transition it? If we're talking about supply chain, what can we do to really step in and make that difference? I think the other point I'd make is that housing associations are best placed to build communities, not just homes. We've got the financial capacity to do it. We've got the skills to unlock large-scale development. And I touched on it earlier that if we're actually out there in the market trying to buy land and competing against high-density residential development schemes, and we're trying to build in lower density schemes with better public open space, larger gardens, better access, the ability to socially distance, providing cycle tracks, walking facilities, or even if it's outdoor exercise area. It's how we can actually make that residual land value compete against what would be necessarily a higher density construction. I think, as I said, we need to use that financial capacity. And I think one of the key areas for us is to look at MMC will need for us in the future, how we can do mass production, and how we can make sure that is fit for purpose. I think that really is a key focus for us going forward.
Thank you, Garen. Right, thanks everyone. We have now some questions appearing on the panel questions screen. We've got 2 questions in. Firstly, from Dorrie Schmetterling from Kensington and Chelsea Council, aimed at you, Louise. But I think the second question, which I'll come on to, is one for absolute the wider panel, and something that both Grant and Mike have also commented upon. So the first question, I think for you, Louise, is about something you said in your presentation about affordability. And the question Dorrie's asking is how do you define affordable or truly affordable in Manchester?
That's a great question. I mean, the affordable, we use affordable as a broad term to scoop up those different tenure types of shared ownership, social rent, affordable housing, as in the government's definition of affordable housing. So it is a bit of an umbrella term, I would say, affordable housing, and our ambitions for 20% affordable housing across all our schemes are for that kind of group of tenure types, if you like. We know that we need to do more for the people on the kind of truly affordable piece, the people on low incomes. This summer has shown us the true value of those frontline workers, and they're not the best paid people in our cities, but they need to be in our cities, and they need to be close to our health providers or the services that we provide as a city council. So it's one of our ambitions to do more in that affordable space. And we've just taken some schemes through planning committee actually in the last couple of weeks where we're looking at doing 100% affordable, which we haven't seen in the city to date. So for Manchester, the term affordable scoops up the different tenure types, and there's a recognition that we need to do more for the low income key workers or people who are looking to start working in the city but may not be in jobs yet.
Can I also contribute to that? Sorry about earlier, I lost my screen. I can't actually see anything on my screen at the moment. I'm assuming you can hear me, but
yes, we can hear you, Garrett, very well.
I think the key for me is that we try and provide affordability across a number of different tenures, and I think I touched on some of the changes. If you look at Section 106 now and how that may be affected by the planning reforms, I mean that's a concern for everybody, I think. And it depends where you are and what you are in terms of affordability, because if you look at 80% market rent in many areas, that's not affordable anyway. And you have to really look at how you can provide that multi-tenure entry point for people, whether it's first-time buyers, first move up, or key workers, as Louise mentioned, and providing that sort of entry point is going to be absolutely critical. And the other point I would make is that if we move to a new model of shared ownership, is how that is going to hold out with lenders, and whether or not it actually will become a realistic deliverable for housing associations that are trying to value land effectively for open market competition.
Mm. I think that's good, and all great points. I'd like to come in on this. You might find it unusual for an architect to be passionate about this stuff, but I'm actually a housing anorak, really, masquerading as an architect. So I wrote a paper for the Housing Forum back in 2014 after a year of consultation about making a place for low-cost housing. And I don't think anybody involved in housing for any length of time will realise that the metric that's been widely used and globally used of 30% of household income sort of works, and you can push on that if you're aspiring to purchase. So again, Mark and I are thinking about this, particularly because the government is a very focused home ownership government. We've argued that there should be a place for low-cost rent to purchase models that allow the occupant to flex over a period of time as their income improves or not. And shared ownership is fantastic, but it doesn't actually answer all the market questions. We need a greater diversity of offer, and one that is genuinely affordable. I like the term genuinely affordable in terms of affordable housing.
Thank you all. Doris' follow-up question is one around, again, it's about Manchester, but broadly about MMC homes. Dory mentions, Louise, in your presentation that you were planning for mostly only leavers of temporary accommodation to access MMC. I'm not entirely sure whether that was the case. Perhaps you can clarify that. And Dory's point is, if that is the case, won't that create ghettos? But perhaps for the wider panel, following that point, is where you see MMC fitting in terms of the for what kinds of people you see across the board, or is it directed to a particular group? Perhaps Louise, you could pick up on the Manchester point first time.
Yes, certainly. I can't see the questions where I am, but just to clarify the Manchester context, so we see MMC as a one of the most impactful ways actually of scaling up that delivery pipeline, which we need. And actually we've got some of the real innovators, I would say, in the MMC space based here in Manchester. So those of you who know Urban Splash will probably know their scheme or their product House, which I think the early tests and the early phases of House were built out in New Islington. I was just walking around Ancoats, New Islington last week. They're now doing a mansion block in modular. They've got rows of terrace houses, and it's so impressive to see the pace actually that the whole cityscape is changing in that area of Manchester. So I don't want people to get the impression that we see modular as just for one section of our communities. Not at all. We see it as a really good way of getting a high quality product. The space inside some of those homes is wonderful. It's adaptable. It's one of those kind of lifetime homes things where you can adapt your house over time. So we see that as valuable to keeping people in the city. We want long-term residents here. We're seeing other innovation, and I think the partnership between Splash, Seki, Sui Homes, the innovators from Japan, and Homes England is a really progressive piece of work. We'd like to land some of that kind of activity that partnership will generate, I'm sure, in the city. We will need, factory production to meet the scales that kind of opportunity offers, and that's where I think it's really important that we as a city start to convene, the different housing providers, the RPs and the private sector, to align them with the market and then the production potential. So our role, I think, is to be that kind of platform, convening space, positive local authority to engage in an agenda that's very live for us. So I don't want you to get the impression that I see modular as just for one part of our community. Far from it. It's a way of creating good product in my mind.
Yeah. Thank you. I think personally, I touched on it a number of times. I think the key to it is supporting those startups and organisations that are trying to get into the MMC window. And I think obviously there's different systems and there's different tiers. There's fully modular pods, there's integrated panels and all sorts of systems. And it may be that we're going to look across our development program and how we can integrate it in different ways and support different businesses coming forward, because a lot of these are very small startups, sometimes family businesses or regional development firms that are doing their own manufacturing. And of course, there are HAs and local authorities out there looking at setting up and running their own MMC product, and some already are. But we see it as definitely the way forward. I think my concerns have always been, and will need to be moderated somewhat, is that if we're building fully podded modular product, is how we can change it in time as a lifetime landlord, how we can swap kitchens, how can we swap bathrooms, how can we rewire them or replumb them, and about how do we future-proof those homes for the flexibility and lifetime living, as Louise mentioned there.
I would absolutely echo what Louise has said, and I'll address that point as well. For us, we've seen most traction in modular delivery in the private sector for the last 10 years. The reason we're focusing on the public sector now and local authorities and housing associations is that they have other imperatives and the reasons to want to get into modular delivery, which is about the industrial strategies and so on. So we're really interested in seeing that scaling up through collaboration there. In the private sector, it's been on high quality build to rent and low discounted sale housing where we've seen most activity. This is extremely high quality housing. I think that we have this issue of a stigma of a prefab past that's really hard to get around. And actually, we also have an operating environment through planning and building regs and tendering and frameworks and actually everything that we know and have come to know about delivery of housing, which actually mitigates against long-term investment and relationships with products over time to get the benefits of continuous improvement. So in the private sector, we have people like Greystar who are on their 4th or 5th modular project through negotiation with a modular deliverer. And the same with Pocket, who have worked with several modular companies building quality schemes of scale. So we want to replicate that in the public sector, acknowledging that procurement and frameworks and everything is somewhat harder. In terms of flexibility, I think that is the key point. And I think we're just on the cusp of really mainstreaming modular and MMC. And I think, Gavin, you're absolutely right. The important thing there is to leap ahead and think through what is the next issue. And you can, of course, design in that flexibility, and that's what great design is all about. And so I think that we're just on the cusp of that. So bringing all these points together now, Gavin, I think that's how we get better and better.
I think the other point is that we're talking about in a COVID environment, and that related to construction. If you're constructing elements in a factory, in a controlled environment, yeah, you are future-proofing delivery, and you should be able to maintain continuity in a way that you probably struggle with on site.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of key added value chain in that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Helen Hall from the Gateshead Housing Company is interested in, it's obviously heard everything you have to say, but is interested in whether this can only be done, or this ambition can only be achieved with new build, or is there anything that can be achieved here or done with existing properties? Mike, does your report simply look at new provision, or the way in which similar improvements or things can be done to existing properties?
So I think that, of course, innovation must happen everywhere, and increasing productivity is sort of at the heart of everything, I think, going forward. We are struggling with productivity in the United Kingdom, and as we leave Brexit, because it looks like that's, as we leave Europe, as I say, productivity is going to become the anchor unless we make it the driver of our industries in the UK. And housing and existing stock is a big part of that. We have to decarbonise the existing stock. Another paper, not this one, but we did look at rooftop development, for instance, that did encompass MMC. It's really hard. It's not for the faint-hearted, but we looked at a programmatic response to that, and we know that there are some investors and local authorities that are actively looking at that area. There are a number of innovations in refurbishment, and I think that's the subject of a whole different session, and I look forward very much to that discussion, but it's there, and I think we should encourage that as much as new build.
I would echo all that again. I think the challenge for landlords is that when you start looking at regeneration, it quite often has a huge impact on those residents, both emotionally and socially, because you are changing fundamentally a community, potentially removing some stock and putting back better performing stock and a better quality. And that is deeply emotional for people who've lived in that area for all their lives. It's not straightforward. It's an element of what we do as social landlords, is to consult with people to come up with the best solution. So without a doubt, it's something that if some of our stock across the UK wasn't fit for purpose before, it almost certainly is going to be a challenged environment going forward. And it's about the outdoor space, not just the fabric.
Thank you, Karen. Louise?
And I would just add, it's actually a brilliant question, because of course the real bulk of our housing is existing housing. So it's something we're looking at really closely. Actually, we're putting proposals together right now for our comprehensive spending review bid, which goes in at the end of goes in on the 24th of September. And we have a huge retrofit program that we need to do across the housing stock here in Manchester. And one of our bids into the CSR program is to actively start funding and transitioning some of those existing properties, because that's the way we will achieve some of our carbon ambitions. It's also the way that we will get homes that are fit for the future. I haven't really thought through how you would do MMC in that space. I think it's a great question. It's making my mind tick now, but I am sure there is huge scope for the kind of component part of MMC to play a role in that massive retrofit program that actually it's not just Manchester, other cities, towns and regions of the country will want to do it. And of course it will generate jobs, which we're going to need as much as housing as we get through this next period.
Thank you. We've got about 6 minutes or so, and I've got a couple more questions that have come through for the panel. This one from Chris Soper at Dudley Council. I mean, we've all experienced, haven't we, the fact that our shopping habits have definitely moved online as a result of COVID. So this is kind of a question about place, I think. So Chris is asking how, in our design of place, how we might balance the need to access things such as shops locally with the increase in online shopping. What will our new place look like in the context of housing?
I referenced it a couple of times. I think it was about the time I went down, so I don't know if I actually got it over. But without placemaking is absolutely critical, and I think the moving away to use pedestrian access to small community centres with, as I said, doctor surgery, small local shops that provide the right social interaction as well, is absolutely critical. We're seeing changes in the high street. We've seen it for some time. There's always been the heralding of the end of the high street. I think that there's always going to be a need for the right shops in the right places with the right access. And I think if you look at some of the city centre changes that have been provisioned now with removal of cars, and I know that's deeply emotional for some people as well. I think it's how we build the placemaking scenario where those social interactions and key support services can be provided. Maybe shared service centres for police, for social services, for housing associations to interact on the same area. So I think it's absolutely key.
Thank you, Karen. Helen Hall. Oh, Louise, did you want to comment on that one?
I was only going to add, and it's a bit of a kind of odd reflection, but I think the long term, because we're talking about placemaking, which is a steady process of change in cities, the long term impact of COVID, I think, will be to make our cities far more livable. So actually, it's accelerating how we change the lived experience of a city. I don't think many of us like shopping for the boring stuff, the washing liquid, the toilet rolls, the floor cleaner, the sort of things that you can have delivered to your house. There's no pleasure personally for me in shopping for those things. There is a lot of pleasure in going into, a great food outlet, a lovely restaurant, a community space, an art gallery, seeing some urban life. It is heartening to be back in Manchester. Speaking to colleagues who are back in the town hall extension this week, we've all worked for pretty much 6 months from home with a little bit of contact in the office, depending on which team you're in. People across the council are just pleased to see each other, to have that kind of contact again, the kind of humanity that is part of cities. And I was on a call earlier in the week. And so the dynamic of cities has changed during this time, but smart cities are making their centres particularly far more livable. We've accelerated our programme of pedestrianising off the city centres. I think we've now pedestrianised temporarily, but it will become permanent, 20 streets, which would have taken us probably 2 years to do previously. We've relaxed licensing laws so that restaurants and shops use the pavement, the road space. I was in the Northern Quarter last night, and it's brilliant. It's a lovely place to walk around. It was always bohemian and had that kind of good edge, but that's spilling out into the streets on warm evenings. And actually, as we head into the autumn and winter, hospitality sector are adjusting fantastically to provide shelter and heat and so on. So the lived experience of cities will be different and is already different, I would say.
Fabulous.
I'd completely echo that. I think that places are about human interaction. We want to be together, and we shouldn't write off cities, far from it. I think that we will get through this pandemic, I'm sure, and there will be recovery in cities and normality returning, I'm sure, at some point. However, the acceleration of the good stuff is the thing we need to hang on to, and it is a joy to eat out in a street that used to be just full of car parking. It's wonderful. I think we've all had that experience, and also rediscovering parks and the beauty of landscape. And our landscape team have got some seriously great commissions over the last 6 months. I think primarily because of the awareness that placemaking is about great landscape and that biophilic experience of enjoying the outside space and places of safety. So I think there's lots of positives that we can grasp onto and must grasp onto with this.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a very positive place to leave things. Apologies, Helen Hall, we didn't get to your final question, but I think we answered one of yours earlier, so I hope you forgive us for that. We are just about there with a minute to go, so it just remains for me to thank you all from the panel, Louise, Geraint and Mike, for your contributions, and also for answering the questions so effectively, and for everyone that's watching this. Thanks for your contributions, and enjoy what remains of your conference. Thank you.